Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Hey, Bruce.
Hey David, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Bruce. How are you doing?
Oh, all right. Settled into a Stanley Cup Finals without the Oilers, but that's not really that new.
Yeah, it seems like a long time since the end of the Oilers
Yeah,
season and the start of the Stanley Cup Finals. That's a nice
yeah,
break for the Avs, a huge
yeah.
advantage for them, I think, honestly. So, Bruce, it's been a fairly quiet week. So we'll just
hmm
quickly go over, kind of skim over a number of topics to bring ourselves and everyone else in oil country and all the faithful up to date on our thoughts and the latest developments. So we'll talk about Jay Woodcroft. We'll talk about Evander Kane, Jesse Puljujarvi, Kuzmenko. We'll talk about 2-year deals. And I got one word here that I can't even read that we're going to talk about. And we will talk about expecting the unexpected. And why don't we start there, Bruce? Because there's a lot, like people are making all kinds of lists of players that the Oilers might get and throwing out
hmm
names and compiling names and on the radio they're throwing out names, this name, that name, and I'm a little bit that's not my thing. That's not what I do. And the reason I don't do it is this summer it's actually kind of twofold. First of all, last year after the season, at this time, if someone had said in the playoffs the Edmonton Oilers would have had Zach Hyman, Evander Kane, Duncan Keith, and Cody Ceci on their team, and not Adam Larson, who would have guessed
Yeah,
that? Who would have
yeah.
guessed that? Like no one, zero.
hmm
No one would have guessed that. They might have said, "Oh yeah, we have a slight chance at signing Hyman," that kind of thing. But it was completely unexpected the changes that happened on the team, and I'm expecting the same this year. Now, maybe last year was a little different because there was all that salary cap space to play with that facilitated change, and Larson's departure also facilitated change to some extent. But I do think that the Oilers are in this position where they have two excellent playoff players in Draisaitl and McDavid, and a great playoff run to go by, so that we're going to be a very attractive destination for players and players who are good, like Keith and Kane, who actually recruited the Oilers, I think, to come here. That's going to happen again. And Hyman. There's going to be players who are going to want to come here, and we don't know who they are right now.
Right.
The second reason is the one I often give now. Like, we're going to get this player, that player. I really don't know these players well enough to have an informed opinion on them. And I'm going to be completely honest with you, Bruce. I don't think most people who are writing about this have enough information to make an informed opinion. They think they do. Many people think they do. I don't believe that they do. And it shows in their record over the years recommending this player and that player. Some of them turn out, some of them don't. They really don't. I mean, that's just the nature of all players coming in. But I don't think people have a good handle on players from other cities. I think we actually have a good handle on players on the Oilers and can talk about their values. So, like, we'll talk about Puljujarvi today, and
hmm
what the Oilers should do with him. But I don't think most people giving their opinions know enough about these players to actually offer a whole lot, at least a definitive word on whether the Oilers should acquire that player or not. They haven't put in the work that's necessary to evaluate a hockey player. So that's my take on the summer. Expect the unexpected. We're going to have maybe some bad surprises, one or two bad surprises, but I bet you we'll have some really good ones too. Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, your original point about all the guys I added last summer that you would never have seen coming is well taken. That, I mean, you look at the end of last summer, anybody had picked all those names in a pool, it would be like predicting the winners of all the World Cup games or something. I mean, it just doesn't happen. There were several surprises, and you might have parsed this free agent or that, but there was some, storylines that took a fairly drastic turn, like those involving Duncan Keith and Evander Kane, to name two of the guys you mentioned. So, yes, expect the unexpected is probably a good thing. I mean, you can say in general terms they're probably going to change out 3 or 5 guys on the team and not 15 and not none. But you don't entirely. Sometimes you have some pretty good clues as to who might be going, and other times they pull a shocker in that department too, like Adam Larson, like that. Even though his contract was up, I was always sort of 10% worried that he might leave, but 90% I thought, yeah, he's here to stay.
Yeah.
Didn't quite work out that way.
Yeah. So this year it's not, you could say, well, you could go back 2 or 3 years and say, well, it was much more predictable in past summers who would stay or go, but I do think because the Oilers are in this different kind of position where suddenly this really is an attractive place to come play hockey for the next year or two. Like if you're going to just sign a 1-year deal, if you need to sign that 1-year deal,
yeah,
the Oilers are more in the running for that player than ever before. And there's going to be 10 of those guys. There's going to be 10 of those guys. And this is what Elliot Friedman made the point on Bob Stauffer's show. They were talking about, should the Oilers trade for Josh Anderson in Montreal or this player, that player? And Friedman just made the point, like, hey, hold on a second here. You're going to have to give up a lot in trade to get Josh Anderson. That shouldn't be the Oilers' plan. The Oilers' plan should be to wait, be open. You have so much opportunity there. He was certain there's going to be players that are going to get squeezed by their teams and by the salary cap, and opportunities will present themselves to the Edmonton Oilers. That should be the plan, along with Holland's plan of internal development. Those are the two plans for the summer as far as I can see the Oilers. But this whole thing about we're going to trade for this guy and give up, useful assets. What a disaster. Personally, I think that's a disaster. That is poor hockey asset management to be looking at that and to be taking on major contracts of players who are iffy bets in themselves on their own teams existing, and to give up a lot for them. Let someone else do that. The Oilers aren't in that position right now, and probably most likely something better is going to come along. And you know what? If it doesn't, Bruce, let's use the example of Josh Anderson. What are the chances that in the next 5 years, Dylan Holloway is going to outscore Josh Anderson? If you don't end up getting anyone else to replace Evander Kane, but you have Dylan Holloway back in the fold, and let's say you also have Jesse Puljujarvi back in the fold, what are the chances that one or two of those guys are going to step up? I actually think it's I would make a bet that Dylan Holloway is going to. Well, I don't know if I'd make a bet. I haven't seen him play enough, but based on his statistics, based on his growth as a hockey player, based on what I have seen of him play, he's a decent bet to score as much as Josh Anderson as Josh Anderson heads into his early 30s, and a player who's been injured a lot. Yeah. So those are the two things I'd like to see. Wait for things to come to you, because they're going to come to you, just like Duncan Keith did, which some people are still not happy with and others are happy with. Evander Kane, everybody's happy with that. They will come to you. And if that doesn't work out, you have Dylan Holloway, who's ready to go. Like, you've got to make a spot for that guy on your team. And then you have, behind Dylan Holloway, you have 3 or 4 other guys who are really good bets. You have, Carter Savoy, Tyler Tullio, Matvei Petrov, Xavier Bourgault, Raphael Lebois. All of these guys coming up. That's the plan. That's plan, that, as Holland said himself, that's plan A.
Good.
Stick with plan A, and don't wreck yourself. So down the line, like, you bring in these more veterans and you can't pay these guys if they pan out. So I'm a little frustrated, honestly, with the conversation that's going on.
Yeah. When you can't pay your own guys when they get good because you're locked up with outsiders that you brought in at exorbitant dollars, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
So
they've already got Nuge and Hyman, right? Like, these are guys heading into their 30s. They've got 2 risky bets now. They've got Darnell Nurse. Suddenly seems like a risky bet. It didn't seem that way before he got injured, but suddenly seems that way because he just got injured. So that's recency bias.
Right.
But you have some major bets, big bets of players into their 30s. Man, you cannot make a ton of those and be competitive in the long haul And I think the Oilers have made enough of them. Maybe you could make one more bet on a goalie in his 30s if you're going to do that, like at an absolutely critical position where you're lacking a player. But other than that, no, you stay away from that. Like Duncan Keith was another really expensive bet, right? Over 2 years. And it's kind of, you could, some people, again, will say it's worked out. Others, it hasn't. But the reason it hasn't, if it hasn't, is because he makes so much money.
Yeah.
He's such a huge cap hit. So
Yeah.
you got to be extremely wary of taking on more money. And I don't see the Oilers, I don't see them doing
Yeah,
that.
well, being a tired old drum, that was always my concern with the Keith thing, was that they took on the full cap hit and that, and they added another $5 million player onto their payroll, which suddenly has top three guys making 30 million and three more guys after that making 5+ million. And then you got another 5 million in dead cap. Well, now you're at $50 million and you got six players, and you haven't got $5.5 million to hope that Josh Anderson suddenly turns it around and turns into Evander Kane. And honestly, David, I don't see much on that guy's track record that suggests that would be a good bet at all. Like uh, he's played 5 full or more or less full seasons in the NHL. He's had some injury problems that set him back. He does score some, like he topped out at 27 goals one year, but that's his only 20-goal season. His maximum assists is 20. He always has more goals than assists. Like he's, take the puck hard to the net kind of guy, and not a whole lot of guile to his game that I can see. And 5 years left on his pact at $5.5 million. I mean, we'd have to see what Montreal would take in return in terms of salary, but I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I just don't see anything that would measure up to a 5-year commitment. And then, let's put it this way: what are the chances that sometime before the 5 years are up, that a large number, probably majority of Oilers fans say that contract is a boat anchor, I wish we could get rid of it?
Well, it's
I'd
probably
say very high chance.
75 to 80%, 90% like chance, like by the end of the contract, which is it's 5 more years, right? That's a long time. So it's probably almost 100%. I hate to be negative, but if you look at big players like that, who are heading into, so this leads us to Evander Kane, Bruce.
Right.
So he's 31, and he's fantastic for the Oilers. Let's be honest. Like, his hands were fantastic. He was the perfect running mate for either McDavid or Draisaitl. He was really nasty. He brought some swagger to the team. He was excellent. But he is 31, and he had a really high, career high kind of shooting percentage playing with McDavid and Draisaitl, which his shooting percentage could improve, right? Because if he was to continue to play with those guys, and also because he wasn't on the first power play that much, if he was to get more power play time, which would have driven up his numbers even more and earned him more money, that's also a place where you get more high percentage shots. So I'm not as worried about the shooting percentage as I am about his age, and about obviously the term of the contract and the amount. We were talking the last time we talked about his kind of going away tweet or letter to Oilers fans.
Yep.
Brian Lawton was on Oilers Now, and he talked. He was very interesting because he said just based on pure performance, Kane would probably garner about $7 million a year on a 4-year deal. I think that's accurate. But Lawton then added the proviso. There's lots of people in the NHL with long memories about Kane as a player and as a person, and they don't like him, essentially. And he thinks in the end that if on a 4-year deal, Kane's going to get something in the $5 million range, something between 5 and 6. So that becomes slightly more doable for the Oilers, I guess. I mean, if you do that, then that's your whole summer, right? You really can't do a whole lot else, unless you're able to move out Cassian and Fogle, for instance, like, make and Barrie and make a number of pretty and not bring back Puljujarvi, maybe not even Yamamoto. That you could do maybe more than if you really exercise. So I think there's and added to that is last winter, when Kane was available, because of his checkered history, there's just a lot of teams, Bruce, and I really believe this. There's a lot of teams, especially in certain cities like Toronto, Montreal, where the politics are different, where there's more, politically correct would be the old phrase about the fan base. They're not going to accept, and in the Eastern Seaboard in the States and in California, in the United States, there will be hell to pay in some cities if they sign Evander Kane. And that's why the market was so small last winter.
Mhm.
And I don't know how much that's changed. So that's another factor that could shrink the market for Kane and have him signing for less than his performance would indicate. And that's what Brian Lawton is expecting to happen. I think that's actually a pretty reasonable assumption to happen, even though many people are predicting he'll get $7 million a year, and you only need one team, of course, to offer that for him to
Right.
get that. So what would you think if the Oilers, let's say Lawton's correct, and the Oilers could get Kane at let's say 5.5 billion, right in the middle of the $5 million range for 4 years? What would be your thought?
Well, I would say that's a better player than Josh Anderson, and the acquisition cost is zero as opposed to whatever they would have to trade to get Josh Anderson. So, I mean, there's that. I mean, uh, your point about political correctitude is, there's different levels of it in different places, but there's lots of people in Edmonton that were fairly upset by that signing, and
Oh,
some
there were.
people, yeah, and some people are still living by decisions that they made at that time. In terms of, but uh, he,
They've stopped being fans, is what you're saying. They've stopped watching.
well, for
A few
paying
people have. I've
fans,
I've,
paying
I've noticed
fans
that.
in a
Yeah,
couple
there
cases, yeah,
is a handful of people, and I don't know how many that is, but I agree.
right,
And I'm not actually commenting on whether it's
hmm
right or wrong to
right.
have
No,
that
I
attitude
understand.
about Kane right now. I'm just, I
Right,
mean, I have commented on it, and I have my own take on it, but I just think it's a fact of the negotiation. That's the only thing I'm trying to establish, because I do think it is a fact of the negotiation.
right. And he did a lot to actually improve in his reputation while he was here. I never heard of a single um, issue that he had, out in the public forum. And on the ice, I mean, he showed a lot with it's the breadth of his game. Unfortunately, he probably devalued himself somewhat with that suspension he took that took him out of the last game.
Mm,
That
I
I
don't.
mean, that hurt his team,
It did.
and it was a dumb play, and it was a dangerous play. I just don't see how that would necessarily raise his value. I guess maybe, I was going to say Philadelphia might like that, but
Well, you play
it's
on the edge, right? Like he was playing on the edge.
yes,
So
yes, and
that's what happens when you
that's
play on the edge. You're going to make plays like that now and then, right? So
just like the guy he took out,
just like the
Kadri.
guy, we all got it coming,
Played
Bruce.
on the edge, and every once in a while would go over the edge. And
Yeah.
this time he was on the wrong edge of the edge.
Yeah. So I would like Kane was really spectacular for the Oilers. So if they could get him for that kind of money with the acquisition cost, even on a 4 year deal, there's
Mhm.
significant risk with that deal. And probably by the fourth year of that, there's a 75% chance that most Oiler fans will be saying, "Oh God, I wish we could get out from under this deal." But
Mhm.
there's also a significant, like it's so hard to win the Stanley Cup. It is so incredibly difficult to win the Stanley Cup. There's 32 teams now, so once every 32 years, on average, you're going to win it. And and that's there's dynasty teams, right? That change those odds, that make your odds even less. So the Oilers are in this position right now to win the Stanley Cup. There's just no denying it. They were in the Final Four. They were
Mhm.
close. They hadn't been injured. So I think you take a bet like that for sure with Kane if it's open to you. If you could get him for 4 years at 5.5 million, and you figure out ways. So you move then Tyson Barrie, you buy out Zach Cassian, you choose between Yamamoto and Puljujarvi, one of the two. You try to trade Warren Fogle without and then you hope that the young players you have in your system can step up,
Right.
and you get other cheap veterans. You get a few
Mhm.
veterans at a replacement level cost and that would be the play if they were to bring back Kane at that amount of money.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention that, Dave. It is exactly 32 years since the Oilers last won the Stanley Cup,
Or
and
do
it's exactly 16 years since they were last in the Stanley Cup Finals, which now mathematically that is the equation for just making the finals and getting out of your conference is once in 16 years. And we won't talk much about their accomplishments during those last 16 years, but when it actually comes to playoff time, they have had a modicum of success. But yeah, the window is certainly now, and it's not going to open any wider. It's going to start closing. Is my take. So there is, but to some extent, the die is cast. I mean, last summer, Holland signed 5 long-term contracts of 3+ years and big money. He also signed a 6th one in Darnell Nurse that the contract didn't kick in for another year, but he signed it last summer, and then he traded for Keith. Well, that was 7 major transactions. And now you get to this summer, and all those guys are on the payroll and locked in at their large 7-figure, in one case 8-figure contracts. And only one guy, Mikko Koskinen, is coming off the books. Well, that doesn't really provide you a whole lot of relief. In fact, the Mikko Koskinen departure, all that does really is pay for the Darnell Nurse raise and nothing else. So he just doesn't have a lot of walking around money. Summer of Ken was last summer, and this summer is patching holes and trying to figure out which small areas of the team you can improve on, and working on those and looking for bargains. And I'd like to see a few more bargain signings. Frankly, I think that's an area where the org has fallen a bit short.
Yeah. And so of those new signings, Hyman, Nugent Hopkins, and Nurse all have no movement clauses. So it's not like, yeah. So you're right. This is the team. And can they add significant pieces to it? Well, Ken Holland is right. That was a very realistic message that he gave to fans. Like, internal improvement on this team is all important. Now that said, you might be able to move out Foegele or Barrie because they are. I think Tyson Barrie you could probably trade and get value. So could you trade Foegele? Because Fogel's $2.7 million, maybe. Like, there might be a team that's fairly expensive for him, and moving out Kassian's even more difficult because he's older than Foegele and he's not as good. He's at a higher cost. So, Bruce, there's talk of let's just start with Jay Woodcroft. On a scale of 1 to 10, how worried are you that Jay Woodcroft will not be here next season? With 10 being very worried and 1 not worried at all.
With 10 being petrified?
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe 2. I mean, I'm a little bit was expecting, frankly, it would be done this week. And now this week seems to have come and gone, and it's not done. And there's somebody had something out there saying that they talked and they made progress, but there was still a couple of outstanding issues. And someone else stepped in with the opinion that maybe that's a good thing, that Woodcroft is holding firm to, get certain concessions or whatever to run his own team. But who knows? I mean, unless you were sitting at the next table at Joey's the other day, we're all just speculating. But my base level speculation is that there is no better place for Jay Woodcroft to go than right here in Edmonton, and that there is no better coach for the Edmonton Oilers to hire than Jay Woodcroft at this point in time. I mean, we've done let's go out and get a respected coach. I mean, we got Pat Quinn. How'd that work out? But in recent years, we got Todd McClellan, Ken Hitchcock, Dave Tippett. We've done, been there, done that. I mean, people say, well, Paul Maurice is an established coach. Yeah, there's a ton of established coaches. And guess what? They're all getting recycled again. Tortorella, for Pete's sake, is back in the NHL. And Vegas just signed Bruce Cassidy out of Boston. And it seems like, if you've got 32 teams in the league, it seems like 30 of them have coaches that coach somewhere else first. I'm exaggerating, but not by enough. I mean, it really is a recycle. And here's an opportunity for the Oilers to break that cycle. And I mean, to an extent, they've already done it because Woodcroft's got that, very strong half-season plus playoff run already on his NHL resume. But they've done it the hard way by developing him in their own system. They'd be foolish to let go of that investment.
I wouldn't be surprised if the sticking point is money. Bruce, the Oilers not this year, but the previous year, I think the Oilers lost, in the neighborhood $50 million
Right.
and upwards. It's a lot of money to lose, even as the franchise is going up in value considerably. That's a lot of money to lose. And we did hear about cost savings within the front office. I think
Right.
like not as many scouts and things like that.
Right.
So, it could be around money, but I expect Woodcroft to be back, and I agree with you. He's the best choice by far. He knows
Mm-hmm.
all the players in the system. So, and I'll give you an example of this. We know when he came in, Tyler Benson had been trying to make the team, and you just get a feeling like if the Oilers decide to move on from Tyler Benson now, which is likely, that you trust that Jake Woodcroft knows this player inside out, was
Mm-hmm.
going to give him every fair shake, and that's going down the line of all of these players. He knows all these young guys, and it's not going to be a situation where they don't get a fair shake. And I still think that happened for example with Anton Lander in the past. That he was thriving under Todd Nelson. Well,
Right.
I think if the Oilers had hired Todd Nelson that year to be
Mm-hmm.
their head coach, they would have been better off than going with an experienced coach. He was an excellent minor league coach. He, with all kinds of experience, knew all those players inside out,
Mm-hmm.
and then they went in a different direction with
Mm-hmm.
Todd McClellan. So I like the fact that this coach knows the organization and all
Mm-hmm.
of these players inside out. He knows Raphael Lebois. He knows Deharnay and Kesselring, what they're capable of, what they're not, and and so familiar with them, and it's got to be an advantage to the Oilers. And of course, he did an outstanding job. Did G.A. Woodcroft this year, except for that overtime when he had Kulak and Keith out at the same time there. So, uh, but I think he'll sign too, so I'm not worried either, Bruce.
Well, and you talk about money. I mean, do you think going out and signing a Paul Maurice off the open market is going to be cheaper than
No, not
bringing
at all.
back a rookie coach? I sure don't.
No, no, I don't think there's
I
any.
mean, Woodcroft, I mean, sure, he's going to negotiate a good salary for himself, but he's not in a place to command, the huge money. And in any event, what the coaches get paid is a fraction of what the top players get, right? It's,
That is true. It's
uh,
probably going to be one's. I don't know what he'll get, like a million or million five to coach. I'm just guessing. I have no idea what inexperienced coaches get. I haven't looked it up. Bruce,
they won't
let's
tell you
talk.
either.
Let's
They
talk.
don't
Yeah.
publish those salaries. They sure do publish the other ones. And honestly, the ones they publish was done at the player's request to the player's advantage. That is raised the market. But they put players pay a heavy price for that in terms of the negativity surrounding the salaries that they make that they endure.
But we
So
always
it's a real double-edged sword.
we've known how much they've made for decades, though. I mean, in the '70s, we knew what the Oilers all made. Like they always announced it, right? Like Glenn Anderson signed like an 8-year deal for 2.4 million or whatever it was. Like we knew that kind of detail back then too. But now we really like now it's
Right.
almost immediate that you know immediately exactly what they made and all the terms of the contract and everything.
They went for
Bruce,
publishing because Gordie Howe, among others, kept getting screwed by the Jack Adams and the Red Wings because he didn't know what all the other players were making, and he was severely underpaid. And the players thought, no, as long as if we go public with this, it'll be to our own benefit. We just have to grit our teeth against the slings and arrows of public opinion.
indeed. So Bruce, there's been a player who's shopping for a team, Andrei Kuzmenko. He's a free agent from
Mm-hmm.
the KHL. Um, 53 points in 45 games last year. He's 26 years old. He's a smaller player, 5'11", 194, it says, according to this. Um, and so kind of a career year. He's been getting better and better. There's rumors that Ken Holland's been interested in this guy for some time. There's 3 or 4 teams after him. I guess the cautionary tale is Kuzmenko had 53 points. The next 2 players on the team were Anton Bertasov, 42 points, and Nikita Gusev at 35 points in 31 games. So Bertasov had a try with the Oilers, really
Mm-hmm.
wasn't that close to being an NHL player. And Gusev was the cream of the KHL. He was the best or second best player for a few years. He comes to North America and he failed to make it. So I can't say that I'm sitting on the edge of my seat about the possibility that Andrei Kuzmenko will be with the Oilers. I'd be surprised if he was a top 6 player in the NHL. So if he's going to make it in the NHL, can this player who was a scoring player in the KHL come over here and find a job on the third line, like be a really good checking player, and kind of, does he have that in his head, or does he have visions of playing with McDavid and Draisaitl dancing in his head? So I'm whatever. If they sign him, that's good, but if they
Right.
don't, that's fine too. How do you see it?
Yeah, well, he's in a situation where at the age that he's at, which I believe is 26,
Yeah.
as an unsigned, undrafted free agent, he has to come over on an entry-level contract with all the limitations of entry-level contracts,
Oh, he
but
does, eh?
only a 1 year deal. Same
I
thing that
see.
Haas and Nygaard had to accept when they came over. 1 year ELC. It limits their salary at $925,000. There can be bonuses, but it's a strict schedule of bonuses that is approved. And of course, if you earn those bonuses, well, you're helping the team in the process of earning the bonuses. And then after 1 year of that ELC, basically he'll already be 27 and potentially an unrestricted free agent. So it's a good situation for him. And I mean, if I'm his agent, and let's bear in mind that his agent is the same guy who placed Evander Kane in Edmonton on much the same theory. You go to Edmonton, you play with McDavid and/or Draisaitl, you light it up, you cash in. And that's an actual selling point for the Oilers right now. And if I were the Oilers, I'd be selling it hard to 1 year guys. Not saying, well, let's go out and get a guy that's got 5 years left at 5.5 million. Let's go out and sign a guy on the cheap for a year. And if he cashes in and becomes too expensive, he moves on. Let's find the next guy. Not to say that Andrei Kuzmenko is the next Evander Kane, because he's not. But he is a guy that might come in and score some goals. One thing about him is I've noticed his steady improvement in the KHL from 15 points to 25 to 31 to 33 to 37, and then a big jump to 53. And also and this is also a handle with care stat, but on a career basis, I think it means more than it does on any individual game. Plus minus, plus 11, plus 21, plus 23, plus 20, plus 17, plus 15. Every year, a significant outscoring player on his KHL club. So that suggests to me that he doesn't stink defensively. And I mean, that was, I think, part of the issue with Gusev was that he was a sort of a one-way player, and
Yeah,
when he
yeah.
wasn't scoring,
Fair
he
enough.
wasn't doing a lot to help the team. And I mean, we haven't seen this guy at all. I've never seen, I don't think.
No, me neither.
I mean, he played 2 games at the World Championships this year. If I watched one of those games, I didn't really notice the guy. And so it's a total wild card. But like I say, the 1 year sale aspect is something the Oilers should be selling hard. You want to come here and establish a reputation? Boy, do we have guys to set you up. You just got to put the puck in the net, and we're all going to be happy.
That I didn't know that about the rookie contract. I
Hmm.
thought they might have to pay him like $1.5 million or $2 million. Like if he's coming here, essentially, you know, replacement level or close to it.
Hmm.
Like the minimum salary is it 700 or 800,000, 750,000, something like that.
925. It might have gone up because the minimum. Sorry, the minimum is 750 now.
Okay, yeah. So
And
he's
the
going to be
ELC maximum is something just under 1 million.
he'd be that. So
Yeah.
that's pretty good deal for the Oilers. And you have injuries. We saw it in the playoffs. Yamamoto went out. Puljujarvi got hurt. People playing with injuries. So yeah, if they can bring him in on those circumstances, that would be quite a benefit to the organization, because there's no harm in signing all kinds of players like that. If they don't make it, you just send them to Bakersfield, and it costs Daryl Cates, but it doesn't cost the Edmonton Oilers anything in terms of their cap. So yeah, sign that guy up tomorrow then.
But Daryl
And
Cates lost 50 million a couple of years ago. But yeah, better to sign the guy at a 1 million plus some modest bonuses as opposed to going all in.
yeah, so let's just quickly talk about Puljujarvi, Bruce. What do
Sure.
you hope to see? Like if it were, what would you be your ideal term contract for Jesse Puljujarvi, or is it something else that you're hoping to see?
Yeah. Well, my ideal was while his stats were modest, was to sign him to a decent term at a decently low price. But I mean, low isn't going to be low, but uh, he unfortunately his play did taper off in the last part of the playoffs or season and the playoffs after he suffered that illness in April, and I didn't see him as good after that as before. And he still had some pretty nice um, uh, what we call underlying numbers or fancy stats, even in the playoffs. But I thought in the regular season he was consistent in that department. He was tilting the ice in favor of the Oilers. I posted on my Twitter feed yesterday. I retweeted some from Dmitry Filipovich showing a extended clip of Puljujarvi just causing turnovers, making checks, winning puck battles, keeping the puck in the zone, and springing pucks loose, or what you often call popping pucks. And often those popped pucks would pop to McDavid or Draisaitl, and good things might happen. And in the video it actually didn't show many goals, but it sure showed a whole bunch of chances that came from these plays, and some of them do turn into goals, and many of them would be the kind that you and I would credit on our Cult of Hockey Grade A Shots project, but don't actually show up in the summary. So people look at it and say, well, 14 goals, 22 assists, playing with McDavid, that's not very good. And to me, the more nuanced view would say, well, but that's in 63 games, I think it was, because he missed a bunch of time with three different issues, both wellness as well as a significant injury that put him out for over a month. And he clearly wasn't skating the same when he returned to the lineup. So to me, I mean, you trade that guy. I mean, you're still going to have to find someone to fill that position, and he's probably going to be more expensive. I mean, you know me, I've long been in the camp of you build from within, and you groom your own players, and you don't get rid of them when they're 24 years old because they're not quite superstars yet. So, well, I've seen enough of that guy. Let's go out and get Josh Anderson. That's going to solve it, and it doesn't solve it. And our team has a pretty strong history of showing that route doesn't work well. And I'm hoping that Zach Hyman, for instance, will be the exception to that rule. But it's you can only go to that well so often. And
Yeah.
to me, I would rather, if you ask me the question, well, who would you keep between Yamamoto or Puljujarvi? My immediate answer is both. And you got good young players that are developing here, and I don't think their costs will be. They're in line for raises. Their contracts are up. They outperformed those contracts, so you're going to have to do something with your budget, but it's not going to cost you as much to re-up those guys in their RFA years as it is to go out and find a top six winger
You know,
to
I
replace
yeah.
him.
Ideally, they could move out Cassian and Fogel and
Hmm.
bring back Yamamoto and Puljujarvi at the same salaries. Like
Yeah, well,
give Yamamoto
at
like
their
three.
salaries.
Yeah,
Yeah.
their salary. Give Yamamoto
Hmm.
$3.2 million for 4 years and Puljujarvi 2.7 million for 3 years. Like this is the perfect time to sign Jesse Puljujarvi to a
Hmm.
longer term contract because he had that, if he had continued on, we would be
Hmm.
talking about a 5 year deal at $5 million a year for Jesse Puljujarvi. If he had continued on, obviously at the pace he was early in the year, which was point a game. Now he did taper off, and
Yep.
there was a significant drop of confidence.
Yep.
Ken Holland talked about he lost his confidence. That's what it looked like. He was afraid to make plays with the puck. He wasn't holding on to the puck. He wasn't confident with the puck. He was getting knocked over again. He was
Hmm.
going through a real rough spell in his game, which can happen to players, especially if they've been injured. So, but Bruce, through the year, he was one of the best Oilers two-way wingers,
Hmm.
and my preference would be to see him. I think this is an opportunity to sign him to like a 3 year deal at like Warren Fogel's money, and I wish I just trade Warren Fogel if you can, and keep Jesse Puljujarvi. That's would be what I would hope to see. If there's a problem about giving him that amount of money, you need cap space for it. Um, so yeah, that would be my hope is you can sign. Don't just and after that, then if you can't do that, sign him then to a 1 year deal. And I think you're going to pay for that, like you did with Darnell Nurse.
Yeah.
I think that's probably going to be the consequence if you go that
Mm-hmm.
route. So I would
Mm-hmm.
prefer to see a 3-year deal than a 1-year deal. And because I think Puljujarvi will score probably 20 goals next year. That he, it's his drop was fairly quick and precipitous this season. Um, so it happened right at the end, and he fell far fast. He was a shadow of himself in the playoffs. So and that's in our minds. But if you go through the whole year, this is a good hockey player. He offers a lot on the forecheck defensively in front of the net. He can
Mm-hmm.
pass the puck. He's unselfish. He's not a great fit. He's no Evander Kane finishing, right?
Right.
Like,
No, no, nowhere
and he's
close.
not gonna be. I don't think
Probably
he's
not.
he's more of he's a player who he's a glue player. That's how he played this past year. He made his lines better.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that to be true. And there's a whole host of statistics that show that. That's what we saw. So yeah, I'd like to see a 3-year deal at a reasonable price. I think that would be fantastic. I just don't know what they want, what Puljujarvi wants,
Right.
and if there's any other issues, we have no idea about it. Does he want to be here? We don't know. Sounded like, the interview in Finland where he was certainly sounded open to coming back to Edmonton.
Mm-hmm. He wants
So
to be in the NHL, is what he said first and foremost. But he didn't
yeah,
say, "I want to get the hell out of Edmonton." It
yeah,
was, I mean,
he's learned that lesson.
his first option would be to, stay with the team that he's been with. But and I know some people get flat out angry as soon as they hear a stat like expected goals, like it's completely bogus, bullshit stat. It's got nothing going for it. Well, Jesse Puljujarvi led the Oilers in expected goals percentage this year at just under 60%. And what that does is it predicts what the outcome of goals will be when that player is on the ice. Well, guess what? When Puljujarvi was on the ice, he was number one in the team in actual goals for percentage at 65%. The expected goals actually sold short the actual results. And sure, some of that was with McDavid, but McDavid did better when he was with Puljujarvi than he did without him. And the same went with Nugent Hopkins, with Draisaitl, and basically up and down the lineup, Puljujarvi improved whatever line he was on, which is different from saying he's the best player on those lines, because generally he wasn't, with
Well, he
possible
wasn't.
exception of a
Yeah.
depth line where he might have been. But if he's in the top six, he wasn't the best player on that line, but he made that line better. And the one player that I've made a comparison to, wrote a long post about this, Valeri Nichushkin. You can watch that guy now. In fact, we just got an eyeful of him in the conference finals. And he's 3 years older than Puljujarvi and a couple of years ahead of him on the NHL, career path. And Colorado, after getting him for nothing out of Dallas, who gave up on the guy, that's really what you don't want to do with Jesse Puljujarvi. After Colorado got him, they got him 1 year cheap. They took a 2 year extension at $2.5 million. Great bargain. He goes hugely outperforming that. But guess what? Now he's 27 and he's about to be an unrestricted free agent. And he's going to probably leave that team and he's probably going to make a lot of money next year. So Colorado, by going 2 years, they got the guy at a really good rate. But they kind of put a deadline on the back end of it. And you can't say for sure that he's going to be that kind of player. I mean, Nichushkin has made massive strides forward in the last couple of years. But there are things in common. And in fact, that tweet that I mentioned earlier, where I retweeted Dmitry Filipovich showing the Puljujarvi clip, that was in response to a clip of Nichushkin's play without the puck, mostly in game one of the Stanley Cup Finals, and how great he was at closing down spaces and just sort of shutting down breakouts before they even reach the blue line. And the two clips, it's pretty instructive to compare the two. And watching through them each a couple times, I'm going, geez, Bruce, you actually got one right. These two players are pretty similar. There's things in common with their games, and it's it's not as obvious as going in scoring beautiful goals and stuff. Uh, but winning the ice and winning puck battles or sawing off puck battles and popping pucks loose it's such a big part of the game. And it's undervalued. And it's undervalued, I think, by management in some cases, undervalued by fans in a lot of cases. But you need to have some of that on your team, and the Oilers have got a good one, and I just don't know why they wouldn't do what they can to keep that guy around for a while.
Yeah, it's funny with Puljujarvi. Like you hear this, like sometimes you hear about this hockey IQ issue with
Oh
Puljujarvi,
man,
and I
stop.
don't get it. Like
No.
honestly, he seems like a really smart hockey player to me. Like I mean, he's a winger for one. Like you're a winger. Your job is to be you drive the team with your energy and your speed and your forechecking. I mean, how much thought goes into that in the first place in the
Hmm.
forechecking? It's just hard work,
Hmm.
skill, speed. And I mean, but he defensively he tends to cover off his players. Now everything was affected as the year went on. There were some issues at both ends of the ice with Puljujarvi, but again, we see this again and again with injured players. It's not uncommon. So yeah, I hope the Oilers make the right decision. And I'm with you. Bring back both Yamamoto and Puljujarvi. Find a way to do that. These are
Hmm.
two wingers who've shown they can play in the top six.
Hmm.
Let's keep those players on the team. Bruce, I figured out the word that I couldn't read before. It's retirements, and referring to Mike Smith and Duncan Keith. Um, I don't see Duncan Keith retiring. He seems like a hockey fanatic. He played his best. He played better as the year went on. He played some of his best hockey in the playoffs. He wasn't great in the playoffs. Like, there's I think some people are not saying he was great in the playoffs. I think he was good or he was okay in the playoffs against tough competition in the playoffs. Duncan Keith was okay. That would be my assessment. He wasn't, he, he didn't light it up. He wasn't Cody Ceci, who was really outstanding in the same role. He was okay and hung in there and helped out Evan Bouchard and was a veteran leader and came through in that way. So I'm okay if he comes back one more year, even at his cap hit. I think it would be probably better for the team if he retired, if I was completely honest. And Duncan Keith announced his retirement. I think, oh well, that's
Yeah.
some cap hit money the Oilers could use. I'm not against that, but if he does decide to come back, I think it's okay. Mike Smith, he was really quite injured. It sounds like through the year, and it wouldn't be surprised if he did go on. Like, is he going to retire or go on LTIR for the final year? It wouldn't be surprised if he wasn't playing on the Oilers
Yeah.
next year,
Yeah.
given
I
his
agree.
injury history and the toll on his body. I don't think the toll was the same on Duncan Keith, so I expect Keith back, and it sounds like Smith may not be, and it'll be a LTIR situation. What's your read on the retirement front?
Yeah. Well, the uh, uh, the bit of news that had a lot of people salivating that Duncan Keith might be thinking about um, packing it in was that the Oilers would supposedly not only get his cap hit back, but they would get an additional $3.4 million in cap space because Chicago would get hammered with the cap recapture penalty. You know, the same one that just got applied a while back to Vancouver on the Roberto Luongo contract. These long 13-year type deals from the mid 2000s into about 10 minutes before the 2012 lockout. Teams were still locking players down for long, long terms into the future, but they retroactively came up with this cap recapture. And theoretically, that was going to work to the Oilers' advantage. And then apparently, news of this got out to the NHL head office that Edmonton's going to get a break. We can't let that happen. So that's already been kiboshed. That if Keith does retire, they would only get the 5.5 and not the $9 million it looked like, which would have been just a fantastic windfall. But at 5.5, I mean, the Athletic, for instance, they did a big project where they valued what each player was worth compared to his cap hit. For Duncan Keith, they came up with $1.6 million against 5.5. And I mean, how they did all that, it's been a little bit of a black box, but in fact, a whole lot of a black box. But a lot of the values of players on other teams and stuff sort of passed the smell test. And I mean, I was surprised to see him come in quite that low, but their point being that he's not a $5.5 million player anymore, and that defensively he's really quite vulnerable. And I mean, that's been a fairly well established fact over his last 2 or 3 years in Chicago. And anyway, uh, I don't see him retiring either. So I think it's a moot point, and they're sure not going to be trading him anywhere else now, are they?
I think that's unfair to Duncan Keith in that he had a really rough start to the year.
Mm-hmm.
And, you could say he was a $1 million a year player for the first 30 games of the season. But, excuse me, as the season went along, he started to play pretty good hockey. He was playing fairly tough competition. He was second pairing consistently all year long. And that's tough competition. He's in the top four. There's a considerable drop off between what those top four guys experience and what the bottom pairing guys experience in terms of quality of competition. Now, as the year went on, Darnell Nurse and Cece started to play more and more of the really tough competition. So that made it a little easier on Keith and Bouchard. But I thought Keith came on pretty strong and was close to being by the end. Like $5.5 million, that's a pretty big hit. But he's like he was a better than average NHL player at that point, I would say. So he's like a $4 million a year player to me for the last half of the season and the playoffs. I'm going to say I would value him at about a $4 million a year player. In the first half, maybe a $1 million a year player. He wasn't very good at all. He was disappointing. So I don't know what that averages out to, but I think we can hope that he will continue on once he's settled into the Oilers. Once he got into the groove with his new team, he became a pretty good player, and I think he'll be the same probably next year, given the fact that he is an absolute fitness fanatic, of which I have zero doubt. And I really do believe he's an outstanding example in that way to his teammates. Having that kind of older player who really takes care of himself. I mean, that's fantastic for Hyman and Nugent Hopkins and Nurse, all these guys to see heading into their 30s. Like, you can do it. You can play till you're 35, and if you really are a fanatic about it, take care of yourself. Now, maybe they were all doing it anyway, all those guys. But so anyway, I think that's a little harsh with the Athletics rating. I don't agree with it. I think it's not accurate with Duncan Keith.
It was strictly numbers. They sure wouldn't be in that. Would be zero component for leadership or setting example or mentoring or any of those other good things that reportedly he did for the club. I do know that defensively, I mean, I don't have to probe very deep in my memory banks to see Adrian Kempa just going right around him and scoring an overtime goal, or indeed the very last moment of the season when Arturi Lehkonen got behind him right off a face-off and wound up getting a deflection and a rebound with nobody around him. I mean, that was when I talked about getting a veteran for the big moments in the playoffs. That seemed like a pretty big moment. But
there were some disappointing moments from the veteran in the playoffs. I agree, Bruce. There ain't no denying it. That is true. All the defensemen, though. Well, it's not true that all the defensemen struggled in the playoffs. Cody Ceci was fantastic in the playoffs, playing against tough competition. With that proviso, like it wasn't like he was error-free, mistake-free. Right. He was fantastic in that role. And in a third pairing role, Kulak and Barrie were also fantastic. They really did well. They also made mistakes, so we can probably think of. But Keith did, I think he actually peaked in the Calgary series. He was really, really good. And against the Avs, he struggled like most of that Oilers team really struggled. And he wasn't alone in making mistakes, although he made some big and notable mistakes, including the play. I see it right now in my mind too, like, because we go over the videotape and there he is again and again, not covering Lehkonen as he goes to the net. So I do remember that, Bruce.
Yeah. Anyway, it's Colorado exposed a few issues with the Oilers, and I mean, the fact is that Oilers' defense structure, as you pointed out, with Ceci and Nurse being sort of the super number one pairing, it was almost like they had a top pairing and two third pairings, the way the deployment went in terms of at least quality of competition. There's just this vast gap between the top two guys and everyone else. But Nurse playing at 40 or 70 or whatever percent he was on any given night was certainly never close to 100%, it didn't look like. and so that top pairing was not as strong. And Cece did a pretty good job covering off, but the top pairing was not as strong to really make that strategy work as well as it definitely did down the stretch of the regular season.
Yeah, and I mean we've talked about this. Nurse got
Mm-hmm.
essentially
Yeah.
got eaten alive against the Avs, and he
Yeah.
really struggled because of his injuries there. So, you know, Tyson Barrie, I have to say, really was great in the playoffs. Like if he
Mm-hmm.
gets traded, I'm not going to be happy. He's a good hockey player. He's probably has though more value to another team than he has to the Edmonton Oilers. The Oilers can slot in Bouchard. They probably should slot in Bouchard on the power play. Yeah, it's an element that he has more than Barrie in terms of shooting the puck. But Tyson Barrie, if he goes, man, he had a really good year. He came through on his promise to be a better defensive player. He came into the season saying that, and he
Mm-hmm.
lived up to it. Now he was playing more often in a third pairing role than he had previously this year
Pardon?
with Waters. Bruce, let's finish off with one question that I have for you. Brett Kulak. So there's talk of him, and I've heard the numbers 4 years at $2 million a year thrown out there. And my initial thought on that was, you know, he would probably be the fifth defenseman on the Oilers for much of that time. He's just in that great wheelhouse of his
Mm-hmm.
career. He's 27, 28,
Mm-hmm.
and heading into his best years of his career. The Oilers had a player like that in Chris Russell, who was kind of a probably best suited as a bottom pairing guy, spent most of his time in his years in Edmonton playing in a top four role. And he was well paid for a lot of those years,
Yeah.
but I think generally the Oilers got decent value or okayish value on that contract. It was higher than Kulak's would be if Kulak signed at $2 million a year. But I'm not for a defenseman who's your fifth defenseman who can
Mm-hmm.
move up and play in the top four. That seemed
Mm-hmm.
like a reasonable price if the Oilers can get him at that. What is your thought?
Well, the Oilers have had that contract for a long, long time, and in theory, that player who can, drive your third pairing or hold his own on the second pairing. And I mean, we're going back to, I mean, Nick Schultz, he was supposed to be that guy. Andrew Ference was supposed to be that guy. Mark Fane was supposed to be that guy, and Chris Russell maybe was the closest one to that guy. And last year, of course, Chris Russell's contract went down and his usage went down. But of course, they brought in Duncan Keith at a little higher salary even than that. Like all those guys were 4 year deals, 3.5 million to 4 million, somewhere in that sweet spot. And for Kulak, I mean, he's 28, and I don't really see the need to be going 4 years. Like I would say, here's a 2 year deal and earn another 2 year deal at the end of it, as opposed to making that commitment. Because you got a lot of guys locked in, right? You got CC locked in for 3 more years, Nurse, of course, for 8 years. Uh, Bouchard, you'd like to think, I mean, the team has control over him for the foreseeable future, even if he's not locked down under contract. And then you got Broberry underneath, uh, and I think ready to make the team in the fall, frankly. And so, what you might think you need right now from Brett Kulak might be a different thing in 2 or 3 years. And all that said, if you could get him at 2 million or hold the line there, that's maybe not bad value. What they don't want to do is say, well, he came in here and played okay for a couple of months, and you're already making almost 2 million as a third pairing guy, and didn't even play every night. So let's give you a huge raise to come back and do that again. They just can't be doing that kind of stuff. They gotta hold the line and give him an appropriate salary for the expectations of the guy.
I guess the length of the deal would be to keep the cap hit down, right? Like they're giving him
Maybe.
some security. So
Mm-hmm.
they're giving him like instead of paying him 2.5, maybe you could get 2.5 some other place over 3 years or something like that. They're giving him that amount of money over time. And I agree, Bruce. Like if you could get him at 2 years at $2 million, that would be preferable, especially because you have all these young players coming up, young defensemen. There's a whole raft
Mm-hmm.
of them
Yeah.
down in Bakersfield, and one or two of them are probably going to be players.
Mm-hmm.
But if they trade Barrie,
Mm-hmm.
and then they'll have a spot then for Philip Broberry, and put him with on the right side and have Kulak out there with him. I mean, that would be a pretty big mobile
Mm-hmm.
third pairing defense that might work out for the Oilers. So
And I will just to add to your point on Tyson Barrie. I wish I had a loony for every time I've read this year or heard someone say the Oilers should find a way just to get rid of that contract, as if the contract is the only thing that defines the player. And and the best thing you can say about him is, well, he kind of covered the bets, so you shouldn't have to sweeten the pot just to get rid of the contract. And I hear precious little about Tyson Barrie, the hockey player, and the things that he did do to help his team, like the humongous goal he scored to win Game 6 in LA,
Good point,
against,
Bruce.
with the, season on the line, jumping up into the rush with 5 minutes left and pumping one past Jonathan Quick to win that game. Or the huge play he made in Game 4 against Calgary with a similar shot from the slot where Nugent Hopkins cashed the rebound to win that game in the late going. Like he made plays that helped the Oilers win games. I mean, let's recognize that fact. And there's maybe a reason that he got paid, and that sure, you can find mistakes. You can find mistakes with a lot of players, but he also did positive things, and it wasn't just a pass in the neutral zone to McDavid and he did all the rest. I mean, he made plays, and they had positive outcomes.
He was so good, Bruce, in the playoffs. He was, he was, and those were such big plays. That goal he scored against LA, like, yeah,
Huge.
yeah. So, yeah, I'm glad if he comes back at the same price he was at. He's a good hockey player. You need good hockey players to win in the NHL. But I do think, in terms of asset management,
He's the one that they've got the replacement for. Yes.
he's got more value to another team than he does to the Oilers. He will give extra value to another team, playing in probably a top 4 role and on running their power play. And if that happens, well, good luck to him. He certainly was great for the Edmonton Oilers, and better in his second season than in his first season. So, well, Bruce, why don't I think we've been going on. We will have lots of time to talk about other players. You're going to start to get into your player assessments, I'm guessing. So
I spent this week looking at the roster and the contracts and some of the implications of the salary cap with the way things are set up, and I'm ready to change that subject because it's time to move on, but more into the focus on the individual players and reviewing their season and their potential role on the team going forward. So that'll be the focus for a while. And I'm not sure we'll get through all the players because we're getting a late start because the team went to the conference finals, David. But we'll certainly cover the key guys on the team and the ones that are vulnerable. We'll look at that.
who may be on the
crew,
move,
especially the ones that either their contract is expired or there's an obvious replacement waiting in the wings. We'll focus on some of those sort of leverage situations as targets for our player review series.
Excellent. Thanks, Bruce. Thanks for talking today.
All right. Thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast. All right. Well, we did find a way to talk for an hour, so.
Was it an hour? Holy shit.
Yeah.
What are you writing about tonight?
Geez, I don't even know.
Yeah, I had that problem last night, and I finally thought, well, I had that interesting chart of the 2-year contract, so maybe I should just look and see what he's done. And I don't know if that article was any good or not, but it was. I want to do something more on players next. So
I might do something on Puljujarvi. Just kind of similar to our discussion today. Like, man, he's just such a lightning rod. Like, everybody has an opinion.
Everybody loved him there for when he was really scoring, and then once the scoring dried up, it's like he's useless. I'm sorry, he is not useless.
I agree, Bruce. Like, there's so much recency bias with this player.
Yeah.
And he left a sour taste in everybody's mouth, but that's overlooking how he played all year. So I'll try to, it'll probably be something like Oilers should stick with glue player Puljujarvi.
There you go.
Sticky business. I'm finding those little words. If you figure like that Bazinga headline, that
Mm-hmm.
story has been near the top of the Journal website all week. And I think it's just because that stupid
The
Bazinga
word?
at the start. Yeah. I think
Okay.
having that kind of
Well,
exclamation or word
yeah.
that sums up your story, the feeling of your story.
Shots fired being
Yeah, shots fired is the ultimate one, you know. But if you don't have that, if you have something else, like like sticky business, I'll probably say that if this one, that kind of like it's for some reason it's very tantalizing to the human brain. And so in terms of writing headlines, I'm going to be going with that for the next little while. All right. You know, that's always my obsession is
All
trying
right,
to
so you're
maximize.
writing tonight, Kurt's Saturday, I'm Sunday night then.
Yeah.
And next week we'll just follow the same
Yeah.
template as this week.
Yeah.
And breaking news, of course, like Monday I wrote that post about Malone because it just came down
Yeah.
while I
We'll
was
have
sitting,
Woodcroft.
you know. What's
Yeah.
that?
We'll have Woodcroft signing probably next week, so that'll come through one day.
Let's hope so. Let's hope so.
Yeah. So this is why it's good
If they
if
blow that,
yeah, no, they won't. It's good if we can, like if we post at midnight, that's good then because and sometimes you can't, like I didn't one day and you didn't one day. But if we do that at midnight, then if there is breaking news at 11 a.m., you know, the other post has had then a long time and we're kind of set.
Yeah.
All righty. Thanks, Bruce. Talk to you later.
yeah,
Have a good
weekend.
walk.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm gonna head out there too. Bye.
Stop raining. Yeah.